Well, good evening, everyone from the Indiana Council on World Affairs. For those of you who joined early, I hope you enjoyed the conspiratorial musical program. We are recording this evening's program, and tomorrow we'll post a link on our webpage. My name is Larry Cimino, and I'm the volunteer president of the Indiana Council on World Affairs. And on behalf of our board of directors, it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening to our program, Conspiracy Theories, History, Ubiquity, Causes, and Consequences, featuring Dr. Adam Enders from the University of Louisville, just down the road from us here a little ways. Before we proceed, I want to mention a few things about the Indiana Council on World Affairs and our programs. By now, I think most of you know that ICWA is an educational, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization with an all-volunteer board. We host timely events of international importance in a format that promotes respectful dialogue and exchange of ideas on a wide range of topics. One caveat, I'd say the points of view expressed by our speakers are their own and are not intended to represent the position of Indiana Council on World Affairs, its board of directors, or its members. I did want to mention that one of the educational programs we run is our Academic World Quest program. It took place earlier this month, and Carmel High School is the state champion. We had more teams and more schools represented this year than ever before, but Carmel will be our guest to travel to Washington, D.C. the end of this month to participate in the national competition among the World Affairs Councils of America, where teams representing all of the states will compete for the national championship. Our Great Decisions program just finished up earlier this month. It was, I think, a resounding success. We had 8 outstanding programs, and that can be run in your own community as well. If you're interested, there's a booklet that you can find online. It talks about the 8 topics, and there's a DVD. You can run it among your own peer group or friends or organization, and we can help you do that if you're so interested. And yes, we are a membership organization, and in normal times we meet in person with live speakers and lively interactions, and we welcome new members. In fact, we thrive on new members and hope that you'll consider joining us if you're not already a member. Membership dues are modest, but they do enable us to deliver our programs to the students and the citizens who are living and competing in this ever more connected world. The Indiana Economic Development Corporation is our season sponsor. The IEDC is committed to attracting and supporting new business investment, creating new jobs for Hoosiers, and furthering Indiana's reputation as a top state for business. I also want to thank all of our sponsors and all of the donors to this program. Every single contribution helps us to deliver on our mission. So thank you very much. Next month, we'll circulate an annual report to all of our members and a slate of candidates for next season's board of directors and council officers for our organization. So for those on the line, let me know if you'd be interested in volunteering to help us continue our 68-year unbroken history of presenting programs that help make sense of the world events around us. So we have every intention of returning to in-person dinner programs in September, and we promise to run these as hybrid programs so that our remote members and followers can continue to enjoy our programs virtually via Zoom. So after the initial discussion this evening with our distinguished speaker, we'll open the floor to your questions, and we do encourage your participation in the Q&A by using that chat button at the bottom of your screen. You can direct your questions to myself, Larry Cimino, or to the group, and they'll come to our distinguished speaker and myself, and not to the entire group. So some of you have already sent me some questions, which we'll address as time permits. So now, over the past 2 years, as COVID-19 rocketed around the world, conspiracy theories quickly followed. Last year, dozens of cell phone towers were set aflame across Europe under the theory that these cell phone towers were spreading COVID-19. Last January, a Wisconsin pharmacist was charged with deliberately destroying hundreds of doses of newly available COVID-19 vaccine because he believed a conspiracy theory that the vaccine would change human DNA. And some people are even asserting that the virus itself was engineered by the Chinese. These aren't the only conspiracy theories making inroads right now. A September Pew Research Center survey found that more than half of Americans have heard at least a little bit about QAnon, that complicated web of conspiracy theories that originated on the message board 4chan. Last November, 2 candidates who voiced support for QAnon theories were even elected to Congress. So how do conspiracy theories like these get started, and why do they persist? Is this a new phenomenon, and is it unique to any particular group or culture or time? And who's most likely to believe them, and why? Is there any way to combat conspiracy theories once they're out there, and what are the consequences for individuals and societies once these spread? Well, in the course of the next 90 minutes, I'm sure we'll learn the answers to some of these questions, including some that I know that you will have. So with us this evening to help us put this all into perspective is our distinguished speaker, Dr. Adam Enders, an assistant professor of political science at the University of Louisville, where he studies and teaches on the psychology of conspiracy theories, misinformation, and political polarization. He earned his Ph.D. in political science from Michigan State University and a BA in political science and public policy from Albion College. I think you'll agree that this is an important topic, made even more relevant by the current situation in Ukraine, where a war of Russian disinformation is being waged in support of the physical war on the ground. So welcome, Dr. Enders.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're here. I wonder if you could start by telling us how you got interested in this idea of conspiracy theories, and how did you get someone to hire you to research and teach about this?
Well, the hiring part's easy. I was on the job market in 2017, just after Donald Trump took the office of the president. So that was fairly straightforward. All of a sudden, something that had been actually not researched too terribly much, even across various disciplines, became hyper relevant. I got interested in this. I had already written half of a different dissertation about an esoteric statistical measurement issue. And I was paying attention to this guy, Alex Jones, who might be familiar to many of you, sort of like the conspiracy theorist in chief in the United States, who runs this website, and he started on the radio, InfoWars. And he started posting his videos to YouTube and getting a lot of views. The foot traffic to his website increased considerably. He started really sort of monetizing his brand. So he sells all of these end of the world survival gear and supplements, nutritional supplements that are basically sugar pills and various other things. And so I'm sort of paying attention to that. Reddit is sort of becoming more important at that time. And there's some sort of conspiratorial content that's becoming, that sort of moves front and center on Reddit. And I just kind of thought to myself, there might be something to this.
Well, thank you. And it was I thought it was fascinating to find somebody right in our neighborhood that's focused on this. I doing some research on this. I learned that there are some centers of excellence in Europe, particularly in UK, Netherlands, and Germany that really have an academic approach to this. And so as I started networking and came across you, I was delighted to find someone close to home. And under normal circumstances, we'd have you here with us in Indianapolis so we could really grill you about this. But let's jump right in. What are conspiracy theories and how do they differ from true conspiracies?
So this is a lot more difficult to answer than you might think, or maybe you do think it's difficult. And I guess a very tongue-in-cheek sort of answer is that conspiracy theories are theories about conspiracies. But I think we can probably do a little bit better than that. So the answer that I'm going to give, more or less the definition that I operate from in my work, is that conspiracy theory is a theory, a causal explanation, a causal accounting of an event or a circumstance that posits that a usually small, usually somewhat powerful group of actors is working in secret in a way that is going to benefit them, and in a way that typically violates laws or at least norms. Now, most people that are in my space can more or less agree on that. that sort of substantive component, which is kind of just like defining, generally speaking, what a conspiracy is. Of course, it could take slightly different forms, and we have legal definitions of conspiracy to commit fraud or murder, or et cetera, et cetera. So what I've given you is somewhat along the lines of that. Mm-hmm. Where the difficulty comes in is that there is some sort of epistemological judgment that comes with the label conspiracy theory. So we don't usually use the term conspiracy theory to mean, a good idea, right? Or something that has very much truth value. So, making this judgment about truth is where the real difficulty comes in. And so, looks like we got somebody. There we go. I muted that person. So, yeah. So one way to think about, the sort of epistemological element of things is, generally speaking, there's this assumption that conspiracy theories are at least a little bit more false than true. So one way that philosophers, for example, have gone about trying to define this epistemological component of conspiracy theory, of the construct, is to say, well, on balance, evidence that has been produced by appropriate epistemological authorities. If we're talking about climate change, conspiracy theories, then the appropriate epistemological authorities would be scientists that do work on climate change, have found that on balance, the evidence does not support the conspiracy theory. And I think generally speaking, that's a good way to go about defining, getting at that truth value element of the label, although it's admittedly unsatisfactory in the absolute, because evidence changes. We get more and more evidence, and sometimes the distribution of that evidence in terms of being in favor or against a particular hypothesis or theory changes over time. People maybe who are professors or something like this have seen this in their own field, I'm sure. Some things are difficult to test, even though they're maybe not strictly completely bizarre or strictly unfalsifiable. So that throws a monkey wrench in things. And also, our sort of scientific paradigms and who counts as an expert and what a good sort of theoretical framework looks like does occasionally, and usually without much notice, sort of radically change. So even the definition I've supplied, we're talking about, evidence from the appropriate experts today. And sometimes it's not going to be the same tomorrow. Okay. So the difference between a conspiracy theory and a conspiracy would in my mind basically be it's still a causal explanation that posits a conspiracy. It's just that we have more evidence for it on balance than something that we call a conspiracy theory.
All right, maybe go a little bit deeper into who are conspiracy theorists in general, and is it a given that those who create conspiracy theories know them to be untrue?
Again, I could offer a tongue-in-cheek sort of a response here. I guess a conspiracy theorist is someone who believes in conspiracy theories, though by my data and by basically everybody else's data that I know, it wouldn't be a very discriminating title. We would all basically earn it at some point. So I don't actually like to use in my work this term conspiracy theorist because, one, it's sort of become pejorative over time, right? And so again, just like nobody labels a good idea a conspiracy theory, nobody labels somebody that they like a conspiracy theorist. Maybe out of love around the Thanksgiving table or something with the crazy uncle that everybody has, but generally speaking, not so much, right? And so, that's sort of, as sort of an interesting aside, I think, the way that this idea of conspiracy theory became sort of a pejorative actually goes back to this really important work from 1964 by a historian called Richard Hofstadter, who wrote a paper and then a book on the paranoid style in American politics. And he wasn't really intending to use the phrase paranoid in a clinical psychological sense, but that's kind of how people took it. And pretty much, since then, we've been stuck with the image of the conspiracy theorist as the tinfoil-hatted balloon in their mom's basement or whatever. I guess that image has probably become even less charitable over time. One reason that's one reason why I don't like to use the term is because it's sort of pejorative. The second reason is that it really sort of artificially dichotomizes a gray world into black and white. The reality is that some people are more predisposed to interpreting things that happen in the world as products of conspiracies, and some people are less prone to that. And so I think it's a lot more productive to think of all of us being arrayed along a continuum. Some are higher and some are lower. And that also sort of, we tend to be sort of interested in the people that are really high along this continuum. Although I would say the people that are really low are potentially problematic too, from a sort of democratic capacity standpoint. We don't want people that sort of uncritically accept information, especially from elected leaders who, we have plenty of examples. There is corruption and lying, et cetera. So thinking about things in terms of this continuum, which we sometimes refer to as conspiratorial thinking as shorthand, is probably the more productive way of doing it. Now, you asked about conspiracy theorists sort of knowing that the conspiracy theories are false. I would say it really depends quite a lot. I mean, I tend to focus in my work on beliefs, and when people believe conspiracy theories, they tend to believe them in earnest. There are increasingly these sort of concerns that you see every once in a while from like data journalists about expressive responding on surveys, and people are just sort of lying. They just want to, it's a new way of sort of mudslinging against the opposition. And some of that happens to some extent, but the evidence for that is actually a lot weaker than those folks tend to let on. And even when we sort of like pay individuals like per question, right, and give like very direct monetary incentives, we don't really move the dial on these things. So we're pretty honed in on the fact that, when people say they believe something, they more or less tend to. Now, there are folks, though, that of course are sort of manufacturers of this, that are sort of like professional conspiracy theorists. Again, that Alex Jones character that I mentioned earlier. We could even think about Donald Trump, right, in the aftermath of the 2020 election, the lead up of the 2020 election, for that matter. Very, carefully sort of, promulgating this idea of election fraud. But a lot of conspiracy theories are also very sort of bottom up. And they sort of get created almost like fan fiction. So QAnon is actually a really good example of this. This was really not, born of elites, or, it's not a propaganda effort. It was born on this sort of, image board is what 4chan technically is, but it's this website that not really all that many people trafficked, and basically users created it, and users furthered it, and sort of spun this whole sort of history and this whole narrative about this character Q, who was providing information to them about the inner workings of the deep state and Donald Trump's battle against it, and so on and so forth. And a lot of conspiracy theories sort of occupy this middle ground, even election fraud to some extent. Again, this was a big sort of focal thing in the last few years, but election fraud conspiracy theories have been around for a really long time. I myself have actually polled on people's perceptions of the probability of election fraud before elections, and then the impact of it after elections for the last like 10, 12 years. And, some non-trivial proportion of people, 20 to 30%, think that there's going to be fraud in the lead up to elections in the United States. And then after we have an outcome, we see this split where the winners all of a sudden say, no, there's no fraud here. And the losers say, yes, there was more fraud than I was even anticipating.
Well, this is interesting because one of the things we try to do is to give some people some perspective on what's going on today. So I want to talk about the Russian-Ukraine situation for a second. It seems that the invasion of Ukraine and the far-fetched conspiracy theories that the Russian media are spinning give us some real-time, realpolitik example to examine where there truly is a conspiracy underway in the form of a Russian attempt to overthrow the democratic government of Ukraine, yet tightly controlled Russian media justify the invasion by proclaiming conspiracy theories about Nazis and faux atrocities and genocide against Russians and Ukrainian chemical weapons and plot by the West to undermine the noble and sacred values of the Russians. How do you interpret this scenario in light of what you said and the impact that tightly controlling the narrative has on the spread of these theories and their acceptance by the Russian folks? Please mute, folks.
Yeah, so, I think that the Russian case is actually very straightforward in how we should think about it. I think that, conspiracy theories in that instance are part of, a concerted propaganda campaign, right? And it's not so hard to make people believe certain things when you are very carefully spoon feeding it to them, and there are literally no alternatives, right? At this point, it's all state media, and there are, there's a new law in effect saying, we can't talk about this conflict in terms of a war, and right, there's this whole sort of like fake news, essentially, law in effect in Russia about combating actual fake news, essentially. This is like I said, a sort of concerted propaganda effort. I don't know that the takeaway from this is that, conspiracy theories always have this direct, kind of like hypodermic effect, right? Where you just expose people to them and then all of a sudden they believe it. There are all these other sort of really important situational factors at play, in particular, the control of information in the media environment. But also, some of the history, predating the conflict is important there as well. Mm-hmm. I would say that, the Russian effort here actually reminds me, if I was going to liken it to some other kind of conspiracy theory that happened in the United States, for example, it actually kind of reminds me more of the big lie than it does like flat earthers, right? Because the important thing about the big lie, even though we've had conspiracy theories about election fraud, as I just noted, before and after elections in the recent past, 2012, 2008, we have that polling data. The difference is that, you had this concerted effort by the leader of a party and a sitting president, right? And a whole bunch of people on their side to sort of perpetrate this conspiracy theory, right? And so I'm sort of this blend of political scientist and psychologist, and I study public opinion. And if there is one like cardinal rule that I could tell you about public opinion that is 100% true, and we're 100% certain we know it, it's that public opinion is substantially a reaction to and a reflection of elite rhetoric and elite conflict. And so, if people on your side are saying something, and then that's certainly driving the other side to sort of respond to it and managing the conversation in that particular way, that's going to be reflected in beliefs among the mass public. So, we can sort of draw some parallels there, although our mass media landscape is much more obviously heterogeneous.
Good. You got into this a little bit when you talked about climate change and that, but what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and a scientific theory? And is it just that one is intended to deceive and the other is intended as an avenue of legitimate inquiry with a willingness to abandon it if proven wrong or replaced by a more compelling theory?
Well, they're both, they both are saying, you have the word theory, right, in the label, right? And so, a theory is just a causal explanation for some phenomenon. So, the difference comes in conspiracy and scientific, right? And so, again, I think when we talk about scientific theory, we tend to assume that there is inherently this sort of greater epistemological value to them. And I think generally speaking, that's right, right? Maybe not every single scientific theory is exactly the same, but generally speaking, these things are designed to be testable empirically, usually, and also and generally speaking, and this is sort of tied to the idea of being testable, falsifiable, and that's sort of this important criterion laid out by this philosopher of science called Karl Popper in the early 1900s, who also, by the way, coined the term conspiracy theory in the way that we use it today. And the important thing that he kind of worked on was the demarcation line. So what's the difference between science and pseudoscience? And his answer was falsifiability. And I think that that more or less applies to conspiracy theories as well. That said, some conspiracy theories are falsifiable and can be tested. Where the trick comes in is, which things do you spend time falsifying or testing? And then also, when it comes to the believers themselves, they're usually not so willing to accept countervailing evidence. Because, if you believe that climate change is a hoax, then why would you accept scientific testing of hypotheses regarding climate change or climate change conspiracy theories by scientists who are supposedly in on the conspiracy, right? So usually there is some way of some mental gymnastics involved in explaining away countervailing evidence, or just sort of moving goalposts, or reconfiguring conspiracy theories so that they sort of persist in the face of countervailing evidence.
Yeah. So conspiracy theories obviously aren't new. I mean, probably the earliest humans, were concerned about the other folks coming to eat them or carry their people away, what have you. But are there some notable examples of conspiracy theories from the past that have persisted, over time? And can you tell us a little bit about some of the, what are some of the more prevalent or audacious theories that have persisted that we still see around today?
So an interesting thing about conspiracy theories is that they don't have any official version, right? Everybody can sort of, again, the sort of fan fiction metaphor, right? People can kind of change them, and in fact, they do change over time to adapt to new scenarios, new situations. That said, they all kind of take this common narrative form, right? That's along the lines of the definition of conspiracy theory that I laid out before. So you can kind of change some of the situational factors, plug in a different villain, right? And change a couple of the details. And I think you can move pretty swiftly from like flat earth conspiracy theories to the queen is a lizard person to just about anything. So, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are a great example of something that's been around a long time. We can trace those back at least to the Middle Ages, the 5th century, where Jews were hypothesized to be poisoning wells and drinking Christian blood and stealing children and drinking their blood for sort of restorative powers, which, by the way, is actually something that is a part of some strains of QAnon. Not necessarily the anti-Semitic part, but the elites in Hollywood and government killing children and drinking their blood. So, those go back a long way, and we can trace them, forward through the years, jumping a few centuries. I guess 1903 is when the Protocols of Elders of Zion was originally published, which is sort of this sort of now famous anti-Semitic pamphlet about basically a Jewish plot to control the world. And, we still see hints of this all the time and even mainstream-ish conspiracy theories about folks like George Soros, who's Jewish and a big donor, Democratic donor, for example. Freemason conspiracy theories go back to the 18th century, usually taking the form of Masons trying to control the economy. Masons sunk the Titanic is a fun one. Illuminati conspiracy theories go back to about the 1770s and are actually about a real group called the Bavarian Illuminati, which was a group of folks that got together who were interested in pushing Enlightenment ideals. Flat Earth conspiracy theories go back to 19th century England, and those are obviously still around. There's a pretty interesting documentary, by the way, on Netflix called Behind the Curve, that takes a look at flat earthers. It's really interesting because it shows the sort of social element to some conspiracy theories like this one. They have like flat earth conventions and they're sort of friends with all of these people. And it's almost like Comic-Con, except, instead of, comic book characters or anime or something like this, they just kind of loosely believe in this flat earth idea. So it gives a different window than we tend to be accustomed to. But in any case, not to take up too much time, but New World Order conspiracy theories go back to Woodrow Wilson and Winston Churchill actually using that term. Biden used the term New World Order in a speech about the Russia conflict not that long ago, and that kind of blew up conspiracy circles a little bit. UFO stuff goes back to the 40s, where ex-military members gave interviews saying that they saw flying saucers and that sort of thing. Although some new government documents have revealed that there are seemingly UFOs of sorts. Water fluoridation goes back to the 60s and the John Birch Society, and plenty of politicians have sort of trafficked in that over the years. And I guess that's just the tip of the iceberg. Those are the old ones that I can think of.
Yeah, good. Well, has your research conducted any polls that give us a sense of the scope of some of the prevailing conspiracy theories now, and whether those are in the US or around the world?
Yeah, so I have some data that I want to share with you. This is kind of a big, nasty table here. I don't expect you to sort of be able to read all of this stuff. But what I did with a couple of colleagues is we scoured this database that houses all of the publicly available opinion polls conducted in the United States going back to the 50s, which is pretty much the beginning of scientific polling. And we found every example of a conspiracy theory question that we could find. And we re-polled those same questions exactly the way that they were asked in May of 2021. So what you've got here, the first column is sort of giving you the question wording. And then I've got the percentage of folks who claim to believe it at time 1 and time 2, and then what time 1 and time 2 are. So, for example, this one here, billionaire George Soros is behind a hidden plot to destabilize the American government, take control of the media, and put the world under his control. 19% of Americans believed that in October of 2011, and 26% believed it in May of 2021. And so we've got, a moon landing question from 1995. We've got JFK assassination questions here, which, by the way, those are typically the greatest level of belief that we tend to find. They're usually somewhere between 50 and 80% believe that more folks than were involved in the plot than were let on. We have one in here that I kind of want to call your attention to that I think is sort of interesting. So the US government is mandating the switch to compact fluorescent light bulbs because such lights make people more obedient and easier to control. So we made that one up. As far as I'm aware, no one believes that. But 11% of folks said that they believed it in 2011. And we were happy to find that in 2021, only 12% of folks said they believed it. So there's really no movement in that over time. So, conspiracy theories about, Jeffrey Epstein are usually hit that like 50% mark, which is about the ceiling. Conspiracy theories about lizard people, about QAnon are usually low single digits. They're actually sort of difficult to poll on for that reason. And then conspiracy theories about, various forms of sort of coronavirus conspiracy theory are usually in that 25 to 35% range. What we found in doing this and making these comparisons between the very first time these questions were asked and then 2021 is that there's a lot more stability than change over time. So most of these haven't moved. And then of those that have moved, the vast majority of them have actually gone down rather than having gone up. And so the average change across all of these in total, there's only 37 in this particular table, but there's like 52 in the total project. Across all of those, the change was a decrease of about 5 percentage points. Okay. Importantly, the United States is not particularly unique in this respect. So this is just a count of the number of conspiracy beliefs individuals held in a bunch of different countries here. So you see we've got Italy, Poland, Argentina, Great Britain, Germany, Sweden, and Portugal. And we asked the same conspiracy belief questions. There were 8 of them. I won't go into what they are, but you can see that the distribution is fairly similar. It's usually pretty skewed, and usually the mode is 1 or 2. So, which is to say, the category, the number of beliefs where most people tend to lie is 1 or 2 of the things that we poll on. And I don't have the United States on this, but it looks just about the same as it does as like Italy does or Germany. So really quite similar to other countries. It's in no way a United States phenomenon.
Well, you said that you study these from a psychological perspective as well as some of the other angles on them. So why do people believe in these conspiracy theories, and just who is it that's most likely to embrace them? Are there demographic data that suggest differences by age or gender or social class or educational level and so forth? And maybe you can discuss that from the psychological, political, or social factors that might be involved in whether these theories, well, I think you mentioned that some of them are top down versus bottom up, but if that's something that you can tell us about too, that would be interesting. Who are these people that believe them, and why do they believe them?
Yeah, so the most important thing that I think I can impose on you is that people are sort of attracted to these ideas for reasons, right? And maybe they're not like good reasons, but they're also very human reasons. And there are reasons that explain why everybody that's in this virtual room, succumbs to false information at some point. That said, there are, particular characteristics that are worth sort of going into. In terms of demographics, nothing too terribly interesting, actually. The correlations kind of bounce around and tend to be pretty small when it comes to gender and even race. When it comes to education, folks might be interested to know that the correlation with conspiracy beliefs also tends to be fairly weak. So you would expect that to be negative. The more educated you are, the less likely you are to believe in conspiracy theories. For some theories, but even then, that correlation is, again, quite weak. Age, we actually tend to find a negative relationship, where younger people believe more than older people. At least that's what we've been finding the last few years. So we're still not exactly sure what to make of that. And we're gonna, we have in the works a big project where we find as many of these beliefs as we can possibly find to see, if there's any systematic pattern there. That said, the way that you put it, these sort of political, social, and psychological factors is exactly the way I think about it, as these three kind of separate buckets of motivational factors. So political is straightforward. It's partisan and ideological identities, and ideological worldviews. So when you are confronted with a conspiracy theory that impugns the other side, you're going to be more likely to believe it. It doesn't mean that you will, but you'll be more likely to, right? And so we don't find any Democrats that are birthers, and we don't find many Republicans that believe super nasty stuff about Donald Trump either, right? And so that's just what we call motivated reasoning, and fairly straightforward. It's not all about identity in that case, though. Ideology comes into view too. So we could imagine maybe conservatives that are worried about the types of government interventions that would be necessary to combat climate change, and therefore sort of glomming onto climate change conspiracy theories as sort of a way of justifying an ideological stance that they're taking. So that comes into the mix as well. Social factors, religious identities, right? Racial and ethnic identities. These are important identities for which there are sort of strong in-group and out-group feelings, right? So again, it's disliking these out-groups, liking the in-groups, and that sort of dynamic is kind of a theme throughout all of this. But we also find that folks that are in lower socioeconomic status, who are facing a real threat of job loss, are more likely to explain situations with conspiracy beliefs. So, I think it also makes sense that particular racial and ethnic groups glom onto conspiracy theories, because they've been subject to real subjugation and real world conspiracies in the past. So, there are instances where people sort of think in this way for reasons that actually seem somewhat reasonable. And then when it comes to the psychological factors, it's where things I think get kind of the most interesting. So we can think about this in two different ways, sort of subsetting the psychological bucket. There are these sort of cognitive factors that have to do with our hardwiring, and then there are personality factors, essentially. And I guess I would put emotions over there as well. So the cognitive factors, we're all sort of prone to what psychologists call patternicity, which is seeing patterns when there's really just noise. And some people are more prone to doing that than others. And so that's a correlate of conspiracy beliefs, as are the conjunction fallacy, which is a tendency to believe that the joint probability of two things happening is somehow greater than the probability of individual things happening. So that sort of showcases how somebody could believe into this in this broad, complicated plot that seems really improbable, is because they sort of make these errors, logical errors in reasoning. And intentionality bias is another big one. People who tend to ascribe intentionality to things that are really just coincidental. This is why we have bar fights. As people are drinking, you get knocked or you get elbowed and you spill your drink, and you actually become more prone to intentionality bias the more inebriated you get. But inebriation aside, people, again, vary along these characteristics. So we all do them to some extent. Some people are a little bit more than others. Personality factors include things like the dark triad, which is the scary sounding thing that psychologists came up with. And it's basically a combination of antisocial personality traits, in particular narcissism, psychopathy, and what they refer to as Machiavellianism, which is just sort of a tendency to manipulate to get your way. Distrust in government, distrust in others, a support for violence. Some have found a correlation with actual criminal behavior. The propensity to share false information is somewhat correlated with conspiracy beliefs. And so lots of good stuff there. I'll show just a quick graph here. What you're looking at is a distribution of correlations. So we had like 40 different conspiracy theories. And what we did was we took each one of these factors that appear in the sort of beige band, and we correlated it with every single one of 40 different conspiracy beliefs. And then we sort of tallied up those correlations just to see what the distribution of them looked like. And so what we found was that, we get mostly positive and statistically significant correlations with support for violence and spreading false information and psychopathy and populist tendencies. Not so much when it comes to the extremity of partisan and ideological identities. And then for partisanship and ideologies up here and partisanships down here, you can see that those distributions have kind of wide standard deviations. And so with some conspiracy theories, there's a positive correlation, which reflects more Republicans and conservatives. And then some conspiracy theories, there's a negative correlation, which suggests more liberals and Democrats. So, I just want to sort of, it's sort of a complicated figure, but my central point here is that it really does matter what conspiracy theory we're talking about. So, some of this can be generalized, but some of it can, and we should be a little bit careful about, how dangerous this thing is or what this one really tells us. So, well, I'll leave it there.
Okay, well, thanks. Yeah. So what's your take on the role of social media and the information environment on the proliferation and perpetuation of conspiracy theories? And has that changed, and what impact do you think that's had on the spread of these things?
So social media undoubtedly, I think, makes the access to conspiracy theories easier, right? And more widespread. Mm-hmm. Although it's not so clear that mere exposure to these ideas have the kind of hypodermic needle effects that a lot of reporting would lead you to believe. And this is my number one thing that I fight reporters about constantly. They love the rabbit hole analogy, right? And it's always every story about conspiracy theories either talks about the rabbit hole or says, we're in the golden age. They love the golden age. We can find the golden age terminology going back to newspapers in the 80s. So we've been in the golden age for a pretty long time, seemingly. The issue is that the rabbit hole sort of analogy doesn't really hold up, because it assumes something about the way people interpret and seek out information that is flatly false by decades and decades of research into propaganda, into media effects, into advertising, political and otherwise, etc. So when we sort of incidentally come into contact with information, what really guides whether we are going to accept that or adopt a belief or something like that, it has a lot to do with these motivations that I was just cataloging, right? And so, when you're somebody who's not particularly prone to conspiracy theorizing, or you encounter a conspiracy theory about your group rather than the out group, unsurprisingly, you don't believe that, right? And, my evidence for this is all of you, right? Because I just told you a bunch of conspiracy theories and you all have the internet, but you're probably not all crazy, right? And, everybody has, again, like the crazy uncle on Facebook who says this or that, and most people just sort of shrug it off. The better model of thinking about how people interact with information is called selective exposure. And so we tend to seek out information that is congenial with our previously held worldviews and beliefs and values. And we tend to selectively ignore that which isn't, right? And so again, the easy sort of way of thinking about it is like cable television, right? Cable news. Democrats don't watch Fox News. Republicans don't watch MSNBC, and it's because it would just infuriate them, right? And they're not going to believe any of that. So yes, there is easier access to these ideas, although it's not very clear that people get sort of randomly sucked into them. This sort of psychological groundwork for people to sort of, again, find these ideas appealing, it has to be there. And that comports with decades and decades and decades of research. It's just that when it comes to social media, we kind of have this meltdown and we think that everything is totally different, but it's really not totally different. And I'll also note that two other important things to note about social media is that people actually have a lot more moderate media diets than we tend to believe that they do, by all the evidence of actual social media interaction. And then second, the folks that are sort of most outspoken, especially about politics on Twitter and on Facebook, are not very representative of everybody else. Most people, unfortunately, don't pay that much attention to politics, and they don't use these platforms for political discussions. And the people who do those sorts of things, tend to be super hardcore partisans, and they traffic sometimes in conspiracy theories for exactly the reasons that I gave before, right? It's sort of identity affirming.
Good. Well, we're getting towards some really important questions, and address this a little bit, but I wanted to get to questions about consequences of conspiracy theories. And do they really matter, is what I start off by saying. Isn't this kind of a part of human nature to try to reinforce your own worldview or shift the blame for your crummy life or bad decisions you've made onto other people? And so what are the possible consequences of conspiracy theories? And they seem to make for compelling media content, but they offer an interesting alternative to evidence-based reporting, I guess. But how do you see these things having consequences for people? I mean, in some cases they're funny, but some cases they're not funny, in that they mobilize people perhaps to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do if they had all of the real information.
Right. Yeah. So again, I think this is a tricky question because it depends on what we're talking about. So, I guess it's easy if you, read a report about, person X, threw a temper tantrum in a Target or something like this, and they were motivated by QAnon, right? So maybe that's not the best thing, but it's not the worst. But maybe election fraud conspiracy theories are pretty bad, right? If we think about, the connection between that and the events of January 6th. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have, flat earthers or people who believe in chemtrails from jet airplanes, right? So people believe these things. It doesn't really matter, right? I guess we could put moon landing in that category and lots of other things, right? You can think about whoever is a lizard person that you want. It doesn't really affect anything. So, one answer is I think it kind of matters what we're talking about. But even then, as I noted, election fraud beliefs, they've been around for a long time, and they never sort of were tied with violence until they were. So, I think when it comes to conspiracy theories mattering, the biggest sort of systematic factor would be the top-down pressure, right? When you have trusted societal leaders that are sort of very carefully and regularly trafficking in an idea, right? And even then, it's not necessarily the case that a conspiracy theory is going to animate behavior, but I think what you mentioned, the idea of kind of activating and mobilizing a little bit is not out of the question. So, when I am disinterested as a researcher in the actual conspiracy theories, right? I think they're not very interesting for the reasons I kind of outlined before. They're all sort of the same, and you can just kind of change some different details and move from one to the next. But where they are interesting is in those motivating factors that underlie them, right? So I just showed you these distributions where some of these are really highly correlated with support for violence, and some of them it's basically not correlated at all. So I think the right way to think about this is what kind of window into somebody's personality does a given conspiracy belief give you? And is somebody with this particular kind of personality likely to engage in dangerous, deleterious, non-normative kinds of behaviors? And it turns out, perhaps unsurprisingly, for example, that Holocaust deniers are really high on all of the super nasty stuff that I talked about, whereas, flat earthers, not so much, right? So I would say flat earth, you go right on ahead. So, I think the way to think about this is to work our way backward from the theory to the kinds of predispositions that fuel it, because those same predispositions are the things that are going to fuel the behavior or not fuel the behavior that concerns us the most down the road. Mm-hmm. It's still a tricky thing to do because behavior is hard to predict, and we have researchers inside and outside of academia and the government that have been trying to forecast terrorist events and that sort of thing for decades and decades and decades. And the reality is it's really hard to predict who will be a terrorist or who will be an extremist. But, I think we can inch our way in that direction by thinking a little bit carefully about, these different kinds of theories and what they're telling us about people who believe them.
Good. I have one final question, and actually it reflects some of the things that have been coming in, and then we'll open this up to the general discussion with the group. Is there a way to prevent the spread of conspiracy theories or to rein them in or correct them once they've been spread?
So, thinking about, social media platforms, one thing that they can do is, take steps to prevent the spread, right? By censoring ostensibly, or by flagging, by noting that this is of dubious quality, or including a link to a fact check or something along those lines. So, that all involves, trying to disrupt information flows in some ways. On the sort of psychological end, there are a couple of different interventions that actually kind of mirror the way that we think about, treating a virus. We have prevention and we have treatment, essentially. So on the preventive side, there are ways of sort of inoculating people, kind of like what a vaccine does, by sometimes this is called pre-bunking. Which is sort of exposing people to this conspiracy theory or misinformation that's going around, and then explaining why it's wrong. And it's the idea of sort of get ahead of it, give people, let them know that this is out there, but it's really nonsense. And then on the treatment side, you can, and the other kinds of information flow disruption is sort of treatment side as well. Prevention side. And then on the treatment side, researchers have tried to basically, expose people to corrective information like fact checks, like information that comes from the appropriate epistemological authorities, whether that's the CDC or something along those lines. And so these interventions, these sort of psychological interventions that are designed to impact attitudes, they tend to find very modest effects. And so this is the problem. A lot of researchers that are not really, political scientists necessarily, but just more like communications researchers that are just thinking about information flows, they tend to sort of buy into this idea of the hypodermic effects, right? Where like, if we can just make it so that people don't see this, then they won't believe it, right? And surely that's going to have an effect to some degree, but the most conspiratorial people are the ones that we're most worried about, I think. And the most conspiratorial people see this as a vast conspiracy, right? So they don't take very kindly to the idea of Twitter telling them what's true and what's false and what ideas they should be able to have and not have. And also, they don't really care about this corrective information that's coming from the CDC or scientists or the government, because they don't trust any of those people, and minimally they don't trust them. Maximally, they're in on the conspiracy. So there's this, possibility of those types of interventions not only not working, but actually sort of backfiring when it comes to the people that we're most worried about, right? So if we can change the minds of people that are sort of very weakly committed to something, fine. But the people that are very weakly committed to something also aren't going to storm the Capitol, right?
Right.
So, I would say we're thinking about this, but it is important, I think, to realize that this is sort of the human condition. And to whatever extent we want to try to address this, what we should try to do is think about ways to increase efficacy, political efficacy, and ratchet up trust in institutions, which is low, and maybe it should be low in many instances. So those are the real problems, but they're a lot more difficult to address than simply fact checking this or that.
And once the horse is out of the barn, as they say, it's kind of hard to get it back in. And
that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now some really good questions coming in. And so obviously the second part of our programs, and one that we really enjoy, is hearing from you all out there about questions that you have. Go to the chat button and send some things in. Have a couple here. Actually one that follows on real well from what you just said about something that you could do. A friend of ours just wrote in and said, what do you think about the birds are not real story that circulated? This group made up this conspiracy, I guess, that the birds were, all the real birds have been destroyed by government, and these are little robot birds that are out there getting their energy from the power wires and spying on us and so forth. It's so ridiculous. But how do you think that's gone over? And have you followed with some of the antics that they've had?
Well, yeah, so the sort of creator, I guess his point was that people are gullible and these are easy to spread or something like that. I don't really know why he needed a movement for that. But I mean, maybe that's just because I think about this stuff all the time and research it professionally. It's not too terribly surprising to me that you could get people to buy into that kind of thing. Although, this is a good example of one that's just sort of silly, and, some people kind of buy into it. It's not going to probably, I don't know what kind of behavior it could stoke, people storming aviaries or something, but to find the real birds or something. Yeah. Not too terribly surprising that one could get something like that to catch on. But I think I view that very much like the flat earth kind of, it becomes this community thing, and there are other people that have this weird belief and they're kind of weird like you, and so you kind of connect with them.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think they were trying to demonstrate how ludicrous and ridiculous and unbelievable many of these things are. And the fact that people join this, you would hope that they would go, oh yeah, I guess I am vulnerable to really stupid things. I better think twice, or actually try to verify, some of these things, which is another question that's come in. When somebody hears something and they say, well, I'd like to believe that, but is it really, how do I know if what they're saying is true about my belief or true about something I'd like to believe about somebody else that we would like to sign on to? I mean, that's a problem with where do you go to get, like you said, the experts, if you would, but how does the average person verify or use their critical thinking skills to to approach this?
I don't have great advice, and I'm, by virtue of sort of studying this stuff, I oftentimes find myself getting pretty frustrated by fact checking and even reporting on things that may or may not be conspiracy theories. But I think, so I mentioned to you that education isn't really very systematically or strongly correlated. But I think, that's very coarsely measured, right? That's just sort of educational attainment in terms of like degrees, right? Time spent in school. But I think, as somebody who's a political scientist, I think the best thing that we can sort of do is, there are some tricks and tips, I guess, about how to verify quality information, and looking to outlets that have, serious, editorial controls and that sort of thing. But I think a lot of this actually stems from people not really being able to properly navigate a world where there is corruption, right? And real world conspiracies do happen, right? And the people that we're supposed to trust do lie, and that scientists do screw up, right? And so I when during the pandemic, when certain public health figures would say, well, attack on me is an attack on science, I have to wince, because it's like, no, you're not, you're just a fallible, practitioner of this ideal that we fail at all the time, but that we try, right? And so, I don't know, in my kind of courses and stuff like this, I try to impart on people that, you can live in this world where the corruption and stuff happens. I think the issue is that people can't sort of meld those two, and it's too easy to sort of throw up your hands and say, whatever, these people are liars, or they're corrupt, or they screw it up. And so I'm just going to believe what I want to believe, which means that it all falls back on those motivations, those partisan and ideological identities, the social identities, and the personality characteristics.
Yeah. Kathy sends an interesting question. Do you have suggestions or strategies for engaging people enmeshed in conspiracy theory in a positive way? And I think she's thinking about people who are, they believe, at risk of doing something, acting these things out, taking up arms, what have you. How do you engage people to talk them down from some of these things? Or can you?
Well, again, I think that's really tricky. I think the first thing that you need to do is see whether they're willing to actually revise their beliefs in the first place, right? Because, the worst thing to do is sort of get angry and then call them conspiracy theorists and say that they're stupid and crazy and et cetera, right? Because nobody likes that. And people who believe in conspiracy theories are people too. So doing that isn't going to help. But, there's this question of, are they even sort of willing to see your side, right? Are they willing to have a conversation about where they got this information, why they think it's been verified, or why they think it's credible, and that sort of thing. And if they're not even really willing to have that conversation, and it doesn't seem like they're willing to budge, my advice is to just leave it alone, probably, because it's just going to end in frustration for you and for them. But it has to, again, it's just like talking to anybody. Find the commonality, right? Oh, there is real corruption in the world, and this thing happened, and it really bothered me, right? That this politician lied, right? Or something along those lines, right? I mean, a lot of the things, a lot of conspiracy theories and misinformation, the ones that are sort of most pernicious, they have, they're flaked with the truth, right? There's a blend of truth, of fact and fiction in there. So, agree on some of the fact part, right? And then use that as sort of common ground to chip away at the fiction.
Yeah. Well, Claire, I think that answers your question too. Here's a question from my good friend Tesfa up in Canada. I think we've answered that about characteristics of people who are likely to believe in conspiracy theories. I think you've talked about that. Sheldon, how can you tell if it's true? We've just talked about that. Here's one though from him. What's the difference between theory and opinion? We get a lot of opinion, I think, on some of the news categories, and you're wondering if there's any verifiable fact behind some of these things. So what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think, cable news is what it is. It's mostly opinion shows. And that's just that. Even if you look at traffic to the New York Times and the Washington Post, despite people claiming to have an appetite just for the facts, it turns out the opinion columns get most of the traffic, right? So yeah, it can be tough to tell these things. I mean, the reality is we don't directly experience most things. Somebody has to tell it to us. Mm-hmm. And all of those folks can get it wrong sometimes, and there's not necessarily anything that you can do about that. I'm I don't, I'm not going to leave here and like plug myself into some kind of information database that all of you don't have access to, where, you know, the truth comes directly to me. You know, I have to navigate, you know, exactly the same kinds of situations. So again, I don't know that I have any particular advice on that.
Yeah, yeah. Sheldon makes another comment here, and it's interesting. This goes to how the media is controlled. It says censoring theories is an affront to freedom of speech. And aren't we lucky to live in a country where, for the time being, we still have a free press, and you can find, you know, different, unlike Russia, you know, where it's not a crime to tell the other side of the story, your take on the story, your opinion on the story, and what have you. So, do you have a comment on that? His was a comment, not a question.
Well, I think I was actually just at a conference at the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University, and this is what they do. They uphold the First Amendment, essentially. And even they were having a small conference to think about, you know, should we revise First Amendment legal frameworks to better accommodate for lies, including conspiracy theories and misinformation. So, you know, we do have some categories of unprotected speech, like defamation and libel, right? Perjury, impersonating a governmental official that aren't protected under the First Amendment. And then other things that have to do potentially with conspiracy theories, like imminent lawless action and true threats, again, that are not protected under the First Amendment. And should we go any further? You know, again, I guess my view on this is that the theories, the ideas themselves aren't too terribly interesting. It's a question of what do they tell us about people. So, you know, I think, you know, even though it's not the best maybe to hear to see some of these things communicated, it makes me wince a little bit in thinking about letting the government decide what's true and false, or fact checkers for that matter, which regularly get things wrong and have to revise them after the fact.
Here's an interesting question from Philip. Do some conspiracy theories function as an oath of allegiance to define membership in a group or exclusion from a group without regard to the factual possibilities? And does that mean I have to say that I believe it to stay part of this group? Whether I believe it or not, I'm not sure. But if it's the oath of allegiance, you know, the leader says the earth is flat. If I want to hang out with these fun people, then I got to say the earth is flat, you know, or
right,
perhaps something more nefarious than that.
Well, I mean, there are obvious examples of like extremist groups that live in compounds, right? Where presumably, you know, you're bought into all of the ideology, right? So that's not too terribly interesting. I'm not really aware of too many other social and political groups where one kind of has to believe something. I think that there probably is occasionally social pressure to do so, though. And an example of that would be election fraud conspiracy beliefs in the wake of 2020, where we saw upwards of 70% of Republicans believing in some version of those things, which is pretty high. You know, again, the losers tend to go up in election fraud conspiracy beliefs after an election, but never as high as 70%, maybe more like 40 or 50%. So, you know, there is always going to be some kind of conformity style pressure when you have, you know, salient identities, and that stuff goes all the way back to the Stanford prison experiment and the Ash experiments on the length of lines and stuff like this. That's just sort of a human thing. So it's not implausible. I don't think that there are many instances of it, though.
Yeah. Okay. Adrienne asks, at what age do you suggest kids be taught about conspiracy theories and how to fact check or check the facts? I guess I would say that.
Yeah. I don't know that I could provide any recommendation on that. That's not really something I've thought much about. I think generally speaking, teaching even just critical reasoning early on is really important. I live in Kentucky. Our public schooling isn't so great. I sort of expect that even that kind of stuff isn't happening, let alone basic media literacy, how to do fact checking and all of that other kind of stuff. But I think those are all basic things that should start early.
Yeah. Well, you could also say, why would we stop teaching that to people as we go forward? Because
Right.
it's not something that people necessarily have picked up at a young age, and as you said, this isn't age specific. So there are probably just as many folks that are our age that would buy into these because they haven't thought of a way to address this. What they're being told. Yeah.
And I'll note, I mentioned before that, the conspiracy theory label kind of became a pejorative over time and whatever. There wasn't a serious systematic research program into conspiracy beliefs until like 2008. So nobody was studying this. I can count on one hand the number of studies between that 1964 book and 2008 that studied conspiracy beliefs empirically. So, if some of this is my out on some of these things, we don't know. There's still a lot more that we don't know than what we do know. I think this research has accelerated a lot faster than a lot of other kinds of research does because of things like the pandemic and other sorts of situational factors. But there's also some risk in moving quickly. Because sometimes we need to double back and re-examine some of our assumptions. But there's still a lot of questions.
Yeah. Let's see. Tess, I think we got the difference between conspiracy theories and cognitive dissonance. We talked about that, but it's good to hear from you anyway. Let's see. Donald, one of our board members. This is interesting. What's the difference between conspiracy theories and modern myth making? Well, this is pretty Jungian, I think, but let's.
Well, I'll have to confess that I don't think about modern myth making much, but taking a rough definition of that I have in my mind, I guess I would say that there's maybe not necessarily so much difference. I mean, there's, again, if we think about some of the factors that motivate these things, I think probably a lot of them are shared, right? Yeah. I don't know anything about modern myth making. Sorry.
Okay. Sheldon has another question here. To your knowledge, was there any theory that started as a conspiracy theory and was later legitimized as the truth? Well, yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
Watergate.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, to some extent, anything that posits a conspiracy that is unevidenced, but that becomes evidenced.
Yeah.
It fits that, right? So Watergate, most assassination and coup plots, terror events, right, are real world conspiracies. Witch hunts that go back to ancient Greece have elements of that. I don't know. I think we can find elements of conspiracy in the Red Scare and McCarthyism. Government conspiracy theories, I don't know, like COINTELPRO, which was a 12-year effort by the Hoover FBI to infiltrate and discredit and disrupt anybody that they perceived to be causing too much social ruckus, from communists and anti-Vietnam protesters to environmental activists and animal rights folks. So there are examples. I think a lot of actual corruption that we see that comes to light in politics actually rises to the definition of conspiracy. We just tend not to think about it that way.
Yeah. No, I think everything we've said is that this is sort of normal human nature to suspect that somebody is out to get me, when in fact there are people who are out to get me. And so these
Yeah.
conspiracy theories, they come face to face with a conspiracy.
Right.
And murder investigations and things like that. There's a theory that someone done it, and he did. They find out that someone actually did do it. So, yeah, I think that's logical. Okay, I think we need to start bringing this to a close. But Donald asked one more question, and perhaps it's rhetorical. It says, are we all victims and perpetrators simultaneously of conspiracy theories?
Yes.
I think it's a good question to.
I think it's more right than wrong, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, don't we all try to explain the world in some way? And and as you said, we're receptive to things that click, that release a lot of dopamine, and say, whoa, that's great. That's great. I want to believe that. And so, yeah. Okay. Well, any final thought that you have that you want us to take away, and before we start wrapping up?
Well, I think I guess just a couple of quick things. I mean, I guess my sort of plea is to not worry too much about the rabbit hole, and realize that other folks are humans and they're susceptible to the same kinds of things that you are, right? And so this is a very human thing. It is not a new thing, especially looking at that polling over time. And so my only fear is that we take actions that are a little bit too hasty. And I think there's a lot of temptation to do that, especially when we were in the middle of this sort of, contentious election with high levels of polarization and a pandemic and, rising social inequality and these other things that really kind of complicate social life. And so, we need to be very careful in picking apart, what's new and what's not so new. And if we want to understand the impact of social media, that means that we also have to look before social media, because we can't just study things during social media, or only in 2018 to know something about the effect of social media. We can't just study conspiracy theories in 2020 and then use that to make generalizations about what conspiracy theories are and how they operate, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to be a little bit cautious and careful in proceeding, even though I share the worries that I think most people have about these kinds of ideas.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Enders. This is fascinating, and I really appreciate you spending the evening with us. I think you've given us a lot to think about by understanding sort of where some of these theories come from and how they're spread and what the consequences might be. But I guess here's my takeaway as I process all of this in today's interconnected world. If we can't agree on basic facts about what's going on here in our country or around the world, there's little hope of generating consensus on what needs to be done to control the big things that we do need to do as a society. I mean, getting the pandemic under control, fixing our economy, stabilizing our democracy, rebuilding public trust in major institutions, which is something that you mentioned. And the information that they provide the public is now, I think, really a national priority. And as you said, we tend not to trust what we're hearing, but we have to be able to agree on some of the basic facts if we're going to move ourselves forward. So I hope we're all a little better prepared to recognize conspiracy theories when we hear them. And there's no doubt that we will hear them and continue to hear them. And perhaps we can better resist their lure and consider what evidence there is to believe or refute them. So in conclusion, thank you again, Dr. Enders. It was fantastic having you on. I'm glad that we found you. And I'd ask the group to mark your calendars for our next, and it's our last distinguished speaker program of the season, on Thursday, May 19th, when we'll present a program on UN Sustainable Development Goal number 2, which is zero hunger, featuring Oxfam Global Program Director for Food Systems, Dr. Latte Lawson-Lartego. Isn't it interesting how things are connected? Clearly, the war in Ukraine is going to have a devastating effect on the availability of grain and the ability to feed a hungry world. So this is where your ICWA tries to help people make sense of what's going on in the world with the global events. So plan to join us next month, and please consider joining and supporting Indiana Council on World Affairs if you're not a member. You can find more information about all of our programs on our ICWA website at indianaworld.org, and where you'll also find recording of this program and previous programs. It should be up tomorrow. So for now, on behalf of the Indiana Council on World Affairs and all of our board of directors, we thank our distinguished speaker, Dr. Adam Enders, and all of you who joined us this evening. And good evening to everyone. I hope to see you all again next month. Thanks and good night. Good night, Dr. Enders.
Good night, thanks.
Thanks again for being with us. It was great. And thanks to
Happy
all.
to do it.
Yeah.